It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, by George, I think he's got it. Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? Welcome on in to another podcast by George. Well, we're here, special time, a special evening show. I don't do nighttime shows very often, but I just couldn't do this one during the day. My normal time's about 10 o'clock in the morning Central Time. I couldn't see doing that because it's about Beaker Street. We're going to revisit one of the most popular shows that I've ever had, actually, is on Beaker Street. We're going to be talking some old time radio stuff, and I got out my lava lamp here. I don't know if you saw the promo or not. Here, let me put this up on screen. This is how I promoted it. And it has a lava lamp right in the middle. And I said, get out your lava lamp. And then I thought right before showtime, hell, I don't have mine. So I ran downstairs and got it. And there it is. Now, as everybody knows that's ever had one, when you first plug it takes a while to heat up, to work, to bubble or whatever. So now it's totally unimpressive right now. As the show goes on, keep your eye on that thing and see if it starts working. But yeah, I do have a lava lamp. People don't realize this. I wear a ball cap. I'm an old man, but hell, back in the day, I was a hippie, basically. We used to call ourselves redneck hippies here in the central part of the country. But man, I had the long hair going. I had the big time flow. And and it kind of leads into Beaker Street, actually. If you think about me, I'm out here on a farm, very isolated. Not like it is now. We weren't interconnected at all, folks. I mean, we had 3 television channels, like them or not, whether they worked or not. And at night, I went up to my room. Check this out. My room had, when I was 15, 16 years old, had red parachute fabric on the walls, black light posters. I had a 4-foot black light, and I had one of these lava lamps. And the cool thing about the black light was I had a can that I got of black paint spray can of black light paint. I got it at a local record head shop. And I would have girls mostly come up to my room and sign their name, maybe put a little message or something on the carpeting with this spray can of the floor in my room. And, my mom came up to clean the room or whatever. You couldn't see it during regular light. At night, you turn off all the lights and then turn this black light on, and boom, up came all of these names. I mean, it was really wild, all over the floor, all of this graffiti. I mean, it was amazing. This black light spray can paint. And my old man was pretty hard on me, but when I had girls coming up 2 at a time to sign my floor, he thought that was pretty cool. Well, anyway, let me get to it, folks, because I'm burying the lead here. I digress. I'm talking too much because we are going to talk about Beaker Street today. And, so think, because I was listening to Beaker Street up there in my room. And, check it out. This is what we're talking about here.
Beaker Street. Beaker Street with Clyde Clifford, an underground music service of the Lynn Broadcasting Corporation.
McKinley Spring. God bless the conspiracy. Central Daylight Time is 11:16.
Great Clyde Clifford at the controls there. We're not going to be talking to Clyde tonight, but we are going to be talking to this guy, folks. It's Richard Robinson. He is a professor in the Department of Mass Media and Strategic Communication at the University of Tennessee at Martin. He's 20 years experienced in radio broadcasting. He's like me. He worked in announcing, news, advertising, sales, programming. He did the whole thing, which you got to do in a small market in particular. He's a media teacher now, a media and public relations practitioner, and a political consultant specialist. He's worked as a morning radio personality, a news reporter, anchor, and an account executive. So let me put that away. Let me click this button here, and let me click this one over here, and we're going to say good evening and greet our good friend here, Professor Richard Robinson. Hi, Richard.
Hey, great to be with you, George.
Yeah, thanks for coming on in here. And I know you've probably heard stories, it's like, everybody's got theirs when it comes to something like that. But that was my deal. I mean, Beaker Street was a door to the outside world. I wanted to expand my horizons and get into the vibe that was happening out on the West Coast and all over. But you really couldn't do it. The only accessibility for somebody, I mean, forget about the internet. I mean, my folks wouldn't let the Rolling Stone magazine come in the door. And the local radio stations, I mean, they were playing pop music or rock, but I mean, they had a playlist of probably 20 songs. And it wasn't any of the the cutting edge stuff that kids want to listen to. Well, you get there and you spin that dial at night and bang, there it comes. And that's Beaker Street. And I think that to me, that was the whole recipe for the success of the format and the program.
Well, you said isolated on a farm in a rural area, and Arkansas is a rural state. So, and Beaker Street went all over the place, a lot of states, and at night everywhere from Canada down into South America, as a matter of fact. So had a lot of fans around there, but there was some, there's a good map of it there. There was some really a little bit of what you would call underground radio back then on the East Coast in New York, and then on the West Coast to a degree. But in the central part of the United States, there really was nothing. And as you so aptly stated, there was no internet, there was no interconnectivity like we have these days. And so we relied on our local radio stations to provide us our programming and play us our music. Well, that's great for top 40, but what about the album-oriented rock, the long cuts? Well, that's where Beaker Street came in and filled that void and did it very, very well. And as a matter of fact, is still doing it every Friday night on a station in Little Rock from 9 to midnight with the original host, Clyde Clifford, still hosting it.
Yeah, I've got a little promo here from the Arkansas Rocks Radio Network. Yeah, this is what they say. This cracked me up. And I see you caught the same thing. Arkansas Rocks Radio Network welcomes Beaker Street live with the original Clyde Clifford, except no substitutions or imitations, folks. I think they did have somebody else host a program similar to that at one time. Maybe it does deserve clarification, but late night underground radio now playing every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time on our network of stations. Now, they also do a nice little history here, and I kind of wanted to have you jump in and explain some of this to our viewers that may not be familiar with it or kind of wondered what the deal always was. Clyde Clifford started out as a transmitter engineer working late nights on KAAY 1090 kilohertz AM, 50,000 watts daylight. And I tell people on my show, Richard, every word means something. And just in that first sentence, there's a lot to unpack. Back in 1966. Now, a transmitter engineer. I had a third-class broadcast license, and that enabled me to work alone in the station and be able to change daytime and evening power and that type of thing. But what Clyde had was a first-class license, and that allowed him to be a transmitter engineer. And he was actually out there like in the transmitter building doing this show, correct?
That's true. And back in those days, from on a 50,000 watt station, from I think midnight to 6, you had to have a first class FCC licensed engineer at the transmitter site. And KAAY's control room and offices were in Little Rock, but the transmitter actually was at Wrightsville, which is outside of Little Rock, several miles. And the only thing out there other than KAAY's transmitter building and 3 antennas was farmland and what was known as the Boys Reform School for a while. It was out there for several years. And so Clyde had to be out there. And he basically, for a long time, he played tapes. He would just put on reel-to-reel tapes and play those through the evening. And then they started Beaker Street. They needed a host, and radio station owners, wanting to be as frugal as possible, said, hey, we'll just set him up down there. We'll put him in a control room, some turntables, cart machines, and whatever, and let him host it from down there. And that way they double dip. They got a transmit engineer, and he was an 18-year-old kid. He said, yeah, I'll be a DJ. I want to do that. So they went down there and set everything up, and that worked out well, except for the transmitters back then. The fan noises were horrific, and it kept whooshing in whenever he would stop talking. So they came out with some background music, which is what you played just a few minutes ago.
Yeah,
those fan sounds. And as a result, it was, like you said, back in the hippie days, and a lot of people smoking pot, not pointing any fingers at anyone, but a lot of people, doing that. It was a wild time, strange music, and he just it took off. The show took off, and that background music really added to the mystique, and his delivery, of course, did that as well.
I'm gonna play a little of that, and I think we can talk. Okay, a couple of things strike me. Now that photo, you see that a lot of Clyde. There's not a lot of photos, and I mean, back in the day, there weren't a lot of photos anyway, and it was radio, so we don't get to see anything of him very much. But is he at the transmitter? Or is he at the station where that photo was taken?
That early photo was him at the control room of the main studios.
That's what I thought. Yeah,
in downtown Little Rock, very, very close to the state capitol, as a matter of fact, because he also did some other. He even did some news reports at times. They sort of pressed him into service wherever they could. I have a photo of the transmitter building. I've never actually been inside it, but it's a brick building, several stories, has an apartment in it, transmitter, all that sort of thing. So it's there are no photos of him at the transmitter, to the best of my knowledge. I've not been able to find one.
All right, I'm going to play this because a lot of our people may not be familiar with Beaker Street. Some folks don't even know what album-oriented rock is and what this format is like. I never did it. When I was a disc jockey, I was a top 40 guy. I was on the music around with all the picks that click with George A., your DJ on a Wednesday and stuff like that. Everything was supposed to be really rapid fire, and it was supposed to be really tight, and you prided yourself in your ability to segue from one song to another and talk up and I know you did that too. You talk up the intro up to the vocal and all that kind of stuff. Well, listen to this, folks, because this is a good example of what I'm talking about. And then also kind of, again, the snap, crackle, pop stuff is in here on purpose, because this is what you were hearing if you tuned in, like from my neck of the woods. Now, this is Clyde introducing Layla. Now, listen how he does this.
Music of Nick Drake. Things Behind the Sun. Music of Eric Clapton. And Layla.
Okay, now what's interesting to me about that is not only the divergence from what had always been radio before, but this AOR format. And, Clyde just seems like a regular guy, but in this sense, he was kind of a genius, because if you're rolling the dial and getting very poor reception, and you're doing an AOR format like this, there's going to be a lot of quiet, a lot of dead air, and you'll miss him. You won't even know that you've landed on the frequency. But with that background music that he was using, as you mentioned, to cover up the transmitter noise, you knew you'd landed on Beaker Street, even if he wasn't saying anything, which he went seconds without saying anything. We would look at that and back in my day and say, well, that's loose. That's sloppy. I mean, but it was genius in a lot of respects.
I mean, you're talking about a guy who passed the engineer's licensing exam at like 18. I mean, he's a brilliant guy. So he got to do his own thing, because the management of KAY never really listened to him at all. They thought was that, well, this is just weird, which it was for its time. The other part is that delivery that he had, that slow and long pauses, pregnant pauses, we call them. That's a lot of people just thought he was a hippie who was at the transmitter or was at the station stoned out of his gourd because of what and he wasn't. He was a nerd who was very smart and didn't do drugs, didn't drink, the best of my knowledge, much, but they just thought he was this guy that was just out of it. And he sounded like it, but between the music and between his delivery and between the music he played, he really pulled it off.
I want to encourage people to comment, and I ask people to put their remembrances in here. Mary Knox, the great Mary, she's a regular viewer of my show. Richard, she's already remarked that we are, as a family, look forward to Beaker Street, especially in the car, all 5 of us. And Mom, yeah, that was the other thing. A lot of times, the only real success I had in getting Beaker Street was in my car because the reception was a little bit better. Now, Mark Williamson's making a point here that it's Cannabis Sativa. That's the name of that background music, that song, that instrumental that he's playing there. It's actually a song. And I'll tell you what I think of when I hear that, particularly when you consider this was the early mid 60s, Pink Floyd. I mean, it's not too far off. You wonder where maybe they got their inspiration or what they were listening to. Think about that sound and that music and that format. And I'm thinking Pink Floyd, but yeah, Cannabis Sativa, I think is how you pronounce it, is the name
I've
of that
heard
song.
it pronounced sativa. I've heard it pronounced sativa.
Sativa. I don't know.
By a group called Head, which I'd never heard of. And that was not the original background music they came up with. The original, Clyde told me in an interview several years ago, was the dream sequence from the soundtrack of the movie Charade by Henry Mancini.
Wow.
And I've not heard that. And they used that for a while. But when they got onto this really, I mean, like you said, once you hear that, you knew you had Beaker Street and you knew you had Clyde on the radio.
Yeah. Let's continue with this now because there's a lot of stuff here that. Okay, it was back in 1966 and started his own brand of late night radio. Clyde used sound effects, that's what we're talking about, to cover up the hum of the large RCA 50,000 watts transmitter, which was only 10 feet away from his audio console. And it was huge and very noisy. I got a transmitter story. You want to hear it, Richard?
Sure.
Here it is real quick. First station I worked at, we have basements up here in this part of the country, and the basement would flood in the station during a hard rain. That's where the transmitter was. It was in the basement, and I would have to log it on, and I'd have to turn it on literally in the morning when we'd sign on because it was a day timer. And the station manager told me, he said, now, I want you to follow my instructions very carefully. Walk down the stairs, stay on the stairs. Don't get off the stairs. There's a wooden handled broom right there by the stairs. Take that broom and reach over and trip the transmitter switch with that. It was just like a light switch is all it was, but make sure you don't get your feet wet. Make sure you use that wooden handle broom and make sure you stay on the stairs. And that was the way, honest to God, I'm not making it up, that I turned on this station every morning, and I was getting paid $800 a month or something like that. Okay, so the sound effects with Clyde's laid-back announcing voice became the sound of a generation of listeners across 38 U.S. states and 16 countries. Yeah, if you get that atmospheric bounce, I mean, it was worldwide. It really was before there was a web, folks.
Well, yeah, and the 50,000 watts during the daytime pretty much covered the state of Arkansas, except for the extreme four corners in the day. But at night, when you got Skywave coming in, you had that skip phenomena. Like I said, that you could hear it from all the way from Canada down into South America. In fact, one of the former station managers told me that they used to get postcards from people who would listen to KAAY at night when they were coming through the Panama Canal on cruise ships. And they got, and of course at night with covering all those states, Clyde got fan mail, bags of it every week.
I saw him interviewed. He said bushel baskets of mail came. Now they were clear channel, weren't they? Were they clear channel?
Yes,
yeah. Okay. And that's a big deal too, because that means everybody on your frequency is off. I mean, at nighttime, they've got to sign off. The frequency goes just to you at that 50,000 watt power. And, you know, there are stations more powerful that I'm reminded of. I heard it on the X by ZZ Top. If you went over into Mexico and stuff like that, those pirate radio stations, they were 100,000 watts. I mean, blasting in sometimes. I mean, it was amazing what they could do. And this atmospheric bounce thing that Richard's talking about is amazing too, because you can have 5,000 watts. If it hits the atmosphere right, you can be heard in China. I mean, it comes all over the place. All right, let me go to this next slide here. It says, when listeners in Cuba, they were asked in 2015 how they listened to rock and roll music under communist control for over 50 years. Yeah, because they weren't allowing it. They said there was only one radio station they were able to pick up over the government jamming. They all said Beaker Street with Clyde Clifford on KAY 1090 kilohertz, 50,000 watts from Little Rock, Arkansas. I mean, that is so cool. No wonder KAY nighttime directional antenna was aimed directly toward Cuba and was used to send hope during the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. Well, I don't know. It was used to send propaganda anyway. We're honored to have
American propaganda.
Yeah, Clyde Clifford on the Arkansas Rocks radio network of stations. Okay, I wanted to read that because that really is a nice summary of where we're headed here. Anyway,
and let me mention, you can still listen to Beaker Street on Friday nights online at arkansasrocks.com.
Yes, that's
on a number of stations around Arkansas. But if you're not in Arkansas and don't have access to it, you can listen to it online still.
Yeah, and we started off by showing that old photo of Clyde. Here he is at the controls still. This is a fairly recent photo. This is what he's looks like today, and we've all changed, folks, and so is he. But this is him still spinning, I suppose, digital files now, because they're not spinning records any longer. Those days are long gone. So, yeah, that's great. That's Clyde today. Let me see what else I've got here. I want to keep this going. Oh, here, Mason McDougal. Yo, Mace, comfortably numb vibes. Yeah, because I was talking about, Pink Floyd. That's absolutely right. I mean, I got to believe they were influenced that they heard that stuff. Well, let me bring this back up, bring me full screen here. And I want to bring up this next little video piece to play this, because this stuff is all way cool, and it harkens back to my childhood and just warms my heart, as they say. Let's listen to, and this is a big shout out to Big Head Matt. He's one of these guys that he's good enough to watch every one of my shows. He's going to like this. This is the outro to one of Matt's big time favorite songs, Monster.
Music of Steppenwolf and Monster. 1238.
Okay, so there we go. And little things mean a lot. I can't believe how attuned I am still to this, because I'm I listen to this, Richard. Let me bring him back in here, and I'm thinking he gives the time, but he doesn't give the temp. Time and temp is what everybody was doing back then. I mean, if you couldn't do anything else, especially late night guys, I mean, they read the forecast, they gave time and temp, they spun records. That's what they did. Well, Clyde, with that frequency and that range that the station had, no point in giving a current temperature, because in North Dakota, where they were listening, it wasn't what it was in Little Rock. So when he comes out and just gives the time, I'm thinking to myself, that's why he's only giving time. And he mentions that it's Central Time, by the way, because it could be different in different time zones.
Yeah. And you mentioned about, the fact that you and I and others did the top 40 or pop music. And most of the songs back in the 60s and 70s were 2.5, 3 minutes. And that was it. And it was high impact, high energy vocals, announcing short, lots of ads when they were sold and those kinds of things. And that was another thing that, with Clyde, is that he, there were record companies were wanting airplay for their longer cuts, and it didn't fit into the format of the top 40 stations. So their choices were for KAY late night were religious programming, which they strongly considered because it's very profitable, and this type of programming. And the program director at that time talked, the story is that there was a staff party at a Mexican restaurant, and everybody got knee walking drunk, and they talked the manager into letting them, try this. And they tried it for a few weeks, and then they expanded it, and then it kind of took off. And I don't think that the management ever really understood it. I just think they liked the fact that it was popular and it added to the station's growth. And KAY dominated Arkansas broadcasting for many, many years, from 62 until probably into the 80s, when it was finally sold to religious concern. So,
yeah. And, that's the other part of it. And Clyde moved on, and people here, for instance, we just think of the station in terms of late night Beaker Street, but as you mentioned, it was huge. And I mean, it was a huge part of people's lives down there. For many years, very profitable. And I always thought that probably Beaker Street wasn't profitable, again, because of the demographics. It wasn't very local. They couldn't sell local ads on the show, probably. And it was young people. It wasn't the older people that they were used to marketing to in that key older demographic. Do you think that's correct or not, Richard?
They had some national ads that ran. They never did really sell it or market it like they could have, I don't think. And I talked to one of the salespeople who also happens to be my father-in-law, and he told me that. But national buys like G. Heilemann Brewing Company, Anheuser-Busch, Coca-Cola, they ran those ads, but they didn't specifically price them out. They did have some record shops and places like that, concerts. They did a lot of concert ads because that was a good target audience. If you got Joe Cocker coming, well, you want it on Beaker Street because he's coming to Little Rock or he's going to Memphis. You want to put that on there because that's going to hit your target audience.
I saw Clyde interviewed one time. Was he just kidding or not? The name, how he came up with that, Beaker Street. He said acid's made in a beaker. LSD he's talking about. And
right.
there you go, Beaker Street. You think he was
just joshing?
Right.
That's
is that true?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's true. Because it was also called, if you'll remember, at that time, acid rock.
Oh, yeah.
And so they were talking about playing acid rock, and they said, well, what are we going to call this show?
Okay.
Well, it's acid rock. Acid's made in a beaker. Let's call it Beaker Street. So
because it's, because I always wondered about that. Matter of fact, I pulled a couple of things here. One of them I'll play a little bit, but I know Simon and Garfunkel had a song in the early 60s before Clyde came on called Bleecker with an L, Bleeker Street. And I always wondered if that had some influence to do with it. And then there's this. Listen to this.
For Jimmy, Larry, Nancy, and Donna in Miami, Missouri, celebrating the new year, having fun and being good, and if they're not being good, at least they're being careful. Happy New Year. Cindy's crying.
Crying, but it ain't no use. She's got the habit and she can't break loose. Stopping each and every man she meets. Gonna be a hooker on Bleeker Street, on Bleeker Street. Honey,
I don't want to play too much of those things because I can get into copyright violation problems, even with these old songs with record companies that are still around and that type of thing. But that song starts off and you think, well, this is a hillbilly song. No, this is a Haight-Ashbury song, folks. It's like the Grateful Dead. They're singing about a woman addicted that's on the street as a prostitute. And the street that she's on is Bleeker Street.
Right.
And so, again, I always kind of wondered, the name of that band is Deepwater Reunion.
Right.
And Clyde plays it. I mean, it's on the show back then. I always wondered if that influenced him, and maybe, but I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, I think it did. I mean, he liked it, and Bleeker sounded like Beaker. He played it a lot on the Beaker Street programs, and they had a reunion in Little Rock with some KAY personalities, and including Clyde Clifford, whose real name is Dale Seidenschwartz. And they had a reunion program that they presented in the theater in Little Rock. And they had that group there, and they sang that song live.
Wow!
So it was very popular. I thought maybe they had changed the words. I think that night they did to Beaker Street instead of Bleeker, but it certainly was more than a coincidence. And he really loved the song, and I think it was because it sounded like his program, and he played it a lot. And he played a lot of different kinds of music. He didn't play just the acid rock.
I know it. Yeah,
he played. He might play opera. I mean, the management didn't care. They weren't listening to him. He could literally do his own thing, and he did. And the public loved him for it.
Here, check this out. I just here, take a look, Richard. I noticed that see the lava lamp. It's starting to work, folks.
Yeah.
So there you go. I got in this room with the red parachute fabric and the black light posters. I had a strobe light, and it was made out of an electric fan and a hat box with I mean, it's hard to describe, but I mean, that's the era that we were living in. That was my strobe light. I mean, that room was something else. I had people from far and wide coming to check that thing out. Okay, so I'm going to read these because I encourage people to not only watch the show, but to comment. And Richard, he knows all these stations. And I know something about KMOX, 1120 in St. Louis. It's a real strong station, Matt Grunwald says. Used to listen to Cards baseball games at night from Newport News, Virginia. Yeah, I mean, it got out all over the place. And my little KMOX story is I met the great Dan Kelly, and he called some ball games for the Cardinals. Of course, he wasn't Harry Carey or Jack Buck. He was a hockey guy. And that's how I met him. But KMOX, again, I don't know if it was 50,000 watts, but it did get out there. It reached a lot of people.
When I was doing my research, and there were a number of 50,000 watt stations out there, WLS Chicago,
yes.
WOAI San Antonio, there's one in North Carolina, I think Florida, WOR in New York, I believe, was a clear channel.
Pittsburgh's got one, yeah.
Yeah, California. But I got a copy of a letter that I had come across in my research from September 14th, 1971, sent to the general manager of KAY. And it says, "Dear sir, I thought you might be interested in learning the KAY signal reach as far as the Woodbridge Royal Air Force Base on the east coast of England. While on tour with the University of Arkansas UArkettes, a musical group of Europe, we stopped at the Woodbridge base, which is manned by U.S. Air Force personnel." Again, this is 1971. And they talk about picking up the station on the east coast of England, KAY, at night. So that shows you the reach. And another piece that I found was an advertising piece they put together to judge listener response. Of course, there was no email, there was no fax at this time, but for a 6-week period, I believe it was, they collected their letters and listener mail response, and they received 14,437 cards and letters over a 6-week period.
My God.
And including 1,824 letters from Iowa, 620 from Illinois, 1,695 from Missouri. I mean, it's the reach was out there. I mean, it was powerful, and they had an audience.
Yeah, and that's what John Nessum is talking about here. He says, I heard a lot of long songs on KAY Beaker Street. That goes to what you were talking about. The radio, the record companies told these artists, make them 2.5 minutes or 3 minutes long, so the radio stations will play them. So if you were long, you didn't get played. Beaker Street would play them. And the Legend of the USS Titanic. I'm not familiar with that song.
Oh, yes. The guy, it's a long, long song. and he played it a lot. It was very popular. Another one that he played a lot was Iron Butterfly, Anagata-DeVita.
Oh, yeah. Everybody knows that one. That was a whole album side
of an album.
Yeah.
And he played that a lot. And, long, long cuts of things.
Anagata-DeVita. Supposedly, the lead singer was drunk, and he was supposed to be singing in the Garden of Eden. That's a little bit of rock trivia that people supposedly know. Instead, it comes out Anagata-DeVita. But here's Mary Knox. She says that I recall Cindy's crying. Yeah. The artist is from Little Rock. Is that right? Is he talking about the Deepwater Reunion? I don't know.
I think so. Yeah, I believe that's right, but I'm not 100% sure. I don't like to say definitively, but I'm not going to argue with Charles. So I'm sure he's right. So.
I love putting these things up on the screen here. Let's see what this one says. Mark Williamson, less than 24 hours away, and we'll get our Friday night fix with Clyde Clifford. Oh, yeah, that's what he's talking about. It's still on the air. Clyde's still doing the thing. That's on Friday night. We had that up. I think it starts at 9, does it?
9 to midnight.
Yeah.
He's live. And it's, let's see, gosh. There's a Facebook page for Beaker Street, and I checked it just the other day, and it has 11,700 people who have liked it and are linked to it. Facebook page, which that makes sense. We old people get on Facebook more than we get on Instagram or Snapchat, and so but over 11,000, almost 12,000 people. That's pretty amazing. It just shows you the power and the hold that it still has on his audience.
Yeah.
Alice's Restaurant. Yes. He did play that. And that's a long, long cut. Yeah. I have the original album, by the way, Mark.
Now, Mark's saying 8 p.m. Central Time. I don't know. Check it out. It's on Friday night, either 8 or 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I thought it was 9, but I can't. I'm getting
Yeah.
old. I can't swear to anything anymore.
Well, Clyde's getting old. We're all getting old, folks. But what great memories. Let me see here what else I have that I can play. I think. Okay, so this is Clyde, and I wondered about this, myself a lot through the years. And you talked about it. You touched on it briefly. He would play anything, and so this is Clyde a few years back talking about how he chose the music for the show.
It's been fun to have been part of this. It's been fun to have been able to bring music to people that they wouldn't have heard, and it's fun to play music that won't get played because of the way radio and record companies are these days. And that's the other thing. I'm constantly aware of the fact that way back when I started on KAY, the only place you got new music was the radio. And that has changed.
Yeah, it's changed, and that was what I thought. Before you could drive, you couldn't go to the record store, and then if you went to the record store, you wanted to take a chance on something, but nobody had a lot of money back then, so you would buy something like, the Association's greatest hits, or, so I remember walking out of the store thinking, what'd I buy that for? Hell, I can hear that anywhere, but you could buy something and it would be a dud. The only way that you could find out what it sounded like was to purchase it. So your only demo was Clyde, Beaker Street. Yeah. Check it out that was. Sure.
I'm just wanted to mention, I went onto the ArkansasRocks.com website, and it's got a Arkansas Rocks Radio Network work on Beaker Street Live with the original Clyde Clifford, late night underground radio, now playing every Friday night, 9 p.m. Central Time on our network of stations. Unless they've changed that, it's 9 to midnight. But now Mark could very well be right. Maybe they've moved it to 8. I haven't listened at 8 o'clock in a while, but I do try to tune in on Friday nights from time to time.
Yeah, I haven't either. So there we go. Well, in any respect, maybe somebody will go check it out just to find out for sure, and that's all good too. All right, I think I've got that as far as the clips are concerned. Now, I wanted to bring this up because there's something here in the history, and my show mostly is news, particularly in this age of politics gone wild. That's what I'm talking about on my program a lot. And we're talking about KAY Beaker Street, but we can't even get away from it then. I don't know that we ever could. I mean, politics has been with us always. You may not like it, but it likes you. That's what I say on my show. And this is something that you authored a few years ago, the role of radio station KAY during the Cuban Missile Crisis, broadcasting United States political propaganda from Arkansas to Cuba. Yeah, what? On KAY? Yeah. You say the study focuses on an event that occurred in October 1962. My God, I'm thinking Cuban Missile Crisis, folks. During what became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, as the crisis began, the United States government, through its propaganda arm, the United States Information Agency, asked 9 commercial radio stations throughout the country to broadcast Voice of America propaganda in Spanish to the island of Cuba. The broadcast continued for over 3 weeks. Now, during this time, the 50,000 Clear Channel AM radio station had just begun airing programming with call letters and new owners in Little Rock. Because, Richard, the station started out in Hot Springs, correct?
That's correct. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and it moved over to Little Rock and got its 50,000 watt Clear Channel, and they just started doing that. And as the news of the propaganda broadcast became known, a young program director at the radio station, KAY, called officials at the United States Information Agency to ask if his station could join the network of stations. So I think they were volunteering. And KAY, from its geographical location, had a very strong signal in the island of Cuba during nighttime hours. Remember that map that I put up earlier? I'll grab that here in a second. The program director understood his coverage and risked his job to assist the federal government in its propaganda effort. Okay. And I'm an old lefty. I'd look at that and say, well, yeah, good on him, but it didn't do any good. And here's this map showing the reach of it. And this is nighttime, and this is just focusing on the United States. Surprisingly, goes deep down into Mexico, but gets down to the southern tip of Florida. And there's Cuba, of course. And that's what they knew, and that's what they did. It sounds like it didn't last very long, though, Richard.
What do you mean,
the effort, the propaganda, the simulcasting down into Cuba, that they only did it for a short time?
the station's broadcast, it was Voice of America propaganda.
Yeah.
And they ran it for about 3.5 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting how it all came about. The Navy had steamed around the island of Cuba and done signal strength measurements. The reason KAY was not included initially is that since it had just changed hands, the FCC had not updated their records. So the United States Information Agency said, what it was showing was that the station was dark. And then that's when the program director called up there to Washington and said, I think it was Carl Rowan, he said he talked with, who was a African-American journalist. And he said, we're putting a hell of a signal in Havana. I mean, and he said, well, we don't even show you being on the air. And once they figured out what they had, they let them join the network. It was quite something how that all came about. And one of the reasons why the United States went with commercial stations, and for a whole lot of reasons, I don't believe that could ever happen in today's political climate. But only about 10% of the Cuban people had a shortwave radio. So Voice of America broadcasts were essentially useless. They needed a longwave radio that would reach the island of Cuba. And the theory was so that Kennedy and the government could get their message to the Cuban people where they could hear it. So that's why they strung together this network, if you will, of stations that could put the signal into Cuba so the Cuban people could hear it. And they did that for about 3.5 weeks. And the reason that the program director risked his job was that, first of all, he just volunteered the station. And the manager at that time was a Republican, and John F. Kennedy was a Democrat, and he didn't want to. I said, "You're giving our damn station over to the Democrats." And then he said, "You didn't even secure any money," because a lot of the station owners and managers thought they were going to get money out of this. What they got was a trip to the Rose Garden after the crisis was over to have a photo opportunity and a luncheon with John F. Kennedy, and that's what they got. So,
my God. And then I've got a little personal experience with it, something called Radio Marti, and I pulled a little slide on this. Radio station goes off the air because of this Cuban interference, very similar to what Richard is talking about. Now, this was back in 1996. WHO AM radio listeners suddenly found themselves hearing Spanish music, courtesy of the Cuban government, and much to the chagrin of station officials and federal authorities. So I'll try to explain this as best as I can, but Cuba didn't just sit idly by. They jammed the other way. I mean, they were throwing interference back at our radio stations. And at 1996, a lot of stations in the middle of the band were carrying on their frequencies this jamming, this Spanish music coming out of Cuba. And of course, WHO is a 50,000 watt station, the highest allowed by law. It can reach 30 states on most nights. The station, which began broadcasting in 1924, is on a clear channel band, meaning no other station in the country can use it. And that's why you see the mic flag off of my shoulder there. I was on WHO. The problem of Cuban interference started after President Reagan's proposal in 1982. That's when I was there to beam pro-Western news and information to Cuba on the 1040 AM band. The station was named Radio Marti after a Cuban national hero, Jose Marti. So the United States government was going to beam this stuff into Cuba on 1040 at night when the WHO is supposed to be clear channel and owning the frequency. And the house of mirrors with this thing, Richard, the part that's unbelievable about this is it's where Reagan worked as a sportscaster. He was one of our alumnus. He worked there in the 1930s. WHO objected strenuously, saying the Cubans would retaliate with its superstation broadcast to interrupt WHO broadcasting. Abe Barron, who I worked for, had estimated that the Cuban broadcast would reduce WHO's coverage area to just 30 or 45 miles around Des Moines because they weren't limited. I don't know what power they were using, but it was monster size, folks. Under heavy lobbying by American broadcasters and Iowa politicians, the government decided to broadcast Radio Marti on another frequency. In May 1985, Radio Marti began broadcasting on 1180 kilohertz on the AM band. But that was my experience with that effort. And again, I would look at it and say it's all for naught. It's stupid. It kind of shows, like a arms race or something like that. We do it, they do it, nobody wins, and they kind of gave up on it. The other thing I would say about this, I don't want to go all political on this show, but I want to tell everybody, and I have before, when talking about the Mueller report and the fact that the Russians were accused of interfering in our elections, and you've heard all of that stuff, and that they're propagandizing in Ukraine and all that. This is nothing new. This stuff has been going on for 60 years. Voice of America Radio, what do you think that is? Radio Free Europe, what do you think that is? I mean, they're doing it, we're doing it, everybody's doing it. And I was kind of surprised to find out that KAAY, Richard, was doing it back in 1962.
Yes. And the interesting thing about that is that, of course, Kennedy was very, we came very close during the Cuban Missile Crisis to going to nuclear war with Russia.
Boy.
And got very close. I don't think a lot of people realize how close we did get. But it prior to the Cuban Missile Crisis, there has been something, an event that transpired called the Bay of Pigs, which the CIA blew big time. And there was a lot of egg on the face of Kennedy and his administration because of that. So he didn't want to mess this up. So the interesting part about is how they went about it. Once the government identified who the players were going to be in terms of the radio station, they sent AT&T representatives. Now, you remember there was only one phone company, AT&T, and they had a guy in the White House, and his job was to keep the lines secure and keep them open at all times. They sent technicians into each one of these stations, and AT&T technicians are going in and out of stations a lot to put in lines, take out lines, secure lines, test circuitry, those kinds of things. And without the owners or the managers knowing it, they installed a dedicated line and put a jack in on the side of most of the broadcast consoles in the control room. And on the night that Kennedy was supposed to deliver his speech, they wanted to make sure the Cuban people could hear it. So what they did was, by predetermined time, the Pierre Salinger, who was the press secretary for John F. Kennedy, called each manager and said, "This is Pierre Salinger calling on behalf of President John F. Kennedy on a matter of national urgency. And he would like to use your station to broadcast the president's address to the American people tonight so that the people of Cuba could hear it. Are you willing to do that?" And a lot of them thought they were going to get money out of it. And they said, "Okay, that's fine." And he said, "So you agree?" "Yes." And he would hand them over to Henry Loomis, who was the head of the Voice of America at that time. And he said, "Let's see, your station, look on the left-hand side of your broadcast console. There's a 1/4-inch phone jack. Plug that in your direct to Washington, and you can carry it live."
Oh my God.
So they had no idea that this had been done, and no idea they were all ready to go. And that was one of the things they said was, "Gee, there's not time to do this." And they said, "Oh, it's already been done."
Wow.
Taken care of. Plug in, and you're ready to go.
I got those were hairy times. I'm not old enough to remember them, but I remember reading. I think it was General Curtis LeMay. I mean, he was already to bomb him, man. And that's the thing about Kennedy. He was in this conference room. Richard mentioned how close we came. If we'd have went in there, followed LeMay and the bombers, and done what the military expert, wanted to do, the thing that saved us probably that was Kennedy was a World War II veteran. I mean, he was a hero. This is the PT 109 guy. I mean, John Kennedy, he wasn't going to be bullied by these military guys in that conference room. But if he had have been, we might be living in a different world or no world at all, because that's what they wanted to do. And Kennedy saved the day, really.
The credit for a lot of that with the group of people, which was called XCOM, the credit for really maintaining order and civility and coming to, exhibiting patience was actually given to Bobby Kennedy. He was the one who kind of brokered the deal. But he talked with his brother a lot, and they went back and forth. And so he gets a lot of credit for doing that. And I think probably rightfully so. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie with Kevin Costner, 13 Days, that's based on the book 13 Days by Robert Kennedy. They didn't get everything exactly right, but it's a pretty good chronology of what happened during those 13 days, which were very, very hairy times for this country. So.
And we're supposed to be talking about Beaker Street, and we will, but it is related. I mean, it's amazing. I had to bring this up. So we talked about your one paper. So tell us what this is. And this is amazing to me. I've always been interested in Beaker Street. I graduated from college. You wrote a dissertation, like a thesis or something on Beaker Street. Tell us about this.
Yeah, this was well, I was a graduate student, a PhD doctoral student at Southern Illinois Carbondale, and once you start into the program, they kind of get you going and thinking about research. And I had already done the research about the Cuban Missile Crisis with all of the stations. And while I was in school at Carbondale, I did a dissertation I did a paper about KAAY's role only. And so when it came time to develop a dissertation, which basically you write a book and it's peer reviewed, I went to them with several ideas. I wanted to do it about KAAY, the whole thing about the news station. And they said, well, that's like trying to write a chronology or a history of World War II. You're going to have to narrow your focus. And so I talked about the news department, which was very active. I talked about, their talent. I talked about their religious programming. But when I mentioned Beaker Street, it perked their ears up, the members of my committee. And they said, has it been written about before? And I said, it's been written about, but not academically. There's nothing there. And so they went for that. And I spent about a year and a half doing research and presented my proposal, which they approved with some reservations and some corrections. And then about 2 years later, I defended it, and it helped me get my doctorate. So I thanked Clyde, and I took he and his wife to dinner in Little Rock one night and gave him an original Beaker Street T-shirt with the head on it, and you've probably seen it maybe in some of that. But anyway, I gave it to him because I always said, and the neat thing about this is I didn't know this until a few years ago. I wrote that dissertation and defended it in 2009. It's actually in the archives of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
My God, what do you mean? What's it mean to defend one? What's that? What is that?
Well, what you do is you go in and you present what you've done. You do research, how you went about it, what your methodology was, what's been done in the past, and then it's a grilling session for a couple of hours. They give you a hard time and try to trip you up and find kinks in your methodology and things like that. It's a rite of passage. They had to go through it, so they want to make sure you go through it. Yeah. And I remember when the committee came out and told me, and my wife was with me, and they said, well, you've got a few things we want you to change, few corrections, but you're gonna pass. And my dissertation chair, who was female, looked at my wife and said, don't worry, he's going to pass. And she said, he'd better.
Yeah.
I've been working
marriage is in trouble,
on this since 2001. So, and this was 2009. So it took a long time.
Well, my lava lamp is bubbling right along here, but I'm running out of time. I got to start calling you Dr. Richard Thompson. And believe it or not, Beaker Street played a role in him getting that doctorate. I mean, that's absolutely great. God, I remember sitting in geology class wondering, what the hell am I doing studying rocks? What? I should have been doing rock music. I should have been, putting up a paper on Beaker Street. Yeah, that's great stuff. Yeah. I got this one. This isn't. Okay, this is 1 year before sign off in 1972. This isn't the T-shirt graphic art. Mm-hmm. No, okay.
There was a head shop called the Little Barn in Little Rock that sold posters, black lights, lava lamps, drug paraphernalia, who knows what all.
The good stuff, yeah.
Yeah, and I think they are the ones who came up with that. I'm not sure, but I know that the station, did promote it a little bit. Probably not as much as they could have or should have, but that's a neat poster.
Yeah, okay. Let me get that off screen. I'm going to bring this up and embarrass Richard a little bit here before we get out of here, because I found on one of the sites or Facebook pages we had this so there he is, folks. Yeah, that's when we were younger. God knows, that's a while ago.
That's right back. I'm going to say in the maybe late 80s, early 90s. I was the morning man on radio station KDEL 100.9 FM in Arkadelphia, Arkansas.
Arkadelphia, Arkansas. Again, I don't have a lot of photos. I've got a handful of them, and that I show on the show. This is when I like to show radio the photo. This is this. I tell people, who's the dummy? I mean, that's this is in an old production booth, and we had somebody come through with the Boy Scouts, I think, or something that I interviewed. And they had this ventriloquist dummy or whatever it is. And so they took the photo, and that's me. I like to show it because I still got some hair. I wish I had that hair back.
There's a picture, I think I posted it maybe at one point. I was at a Wendy's restaurant opening, and Bozo the Clown was there out of Little Rock. And of course, when I posted, everybody wrote, "Which one is the clown?" And I said, "Both."
Yeah, both. I mean, we could tell stories forever. I'll end it with this. And I got all kinds of radio stories, but here's one. And I had just departed this radio station, but after I left, they decided they were going to do a promotion. Rich will love this, with a morning man, just like him back then. And the promotion was going to be his setting the Guinness World Book of Records for sitting in a tub of Jell-O instant pudding. Believe it or not, there's a record for that. I mean, that's how crazy things are. The morning man was going to do that. So the first morning, they filled up this kid's swimming pool with Jell-O instant pudding, and at 6 a.m. or whatever, he came on the air. They rolled the intro, and they handed him the microphone. Well, nobody thought about the fact that that Jell-O instant pudding is mostly liquid. I think it's mostly water, and he was sitting in it, and they handed him a live microphone. Yeah, I mean, didn't kill him, but it knocked him out. I mean, it hurt him.
No,
yeah. I mean, you talk about WKRP in Cincinnati. Yeah. I won't name the station, but that's a true story, folks. That's one of the crazier stories that from back in my radio days. And I've got a ton of them. Now, these comments always come in towards the end. Let's see here. KDL is part of Arkansas Rocks now. Oh, okay.
That's exactly right. Yeah, it's part of Arkansas Rocks, and Beaker Street plays on that every Friday night. That's one of the stations.
Here's a good place to end. Here's Matt Howdy Doody, better known as Ronnie Reagan. Okay. All right, Matt, you get last word, boy. That's great. Actually, we're going to give the last word to Richard here. I don't know. It's been a long and winding road, and you've become an expert, and you're behind the scenes on these Facebook pages and stuff when it comes to Beaker Street. Give us a wrap up here, because I know you can do it. You're good at it. Give us the last word here, Richard.
Well, I mean, Beaker Street is one of those things that it started in 66. Clyde left in 72, went to an album-oriented FM station, KLAZ at the time. And then other hosts continued until 1977, and then it went off the air. 10 years later, it came back one night a week on a station, and Clyde was tapped as the original host. He was working as a television engineer at the medical school in Little Rock at that time and retired from that position. So he did that, and it went to several different stations and finally got canceled again, and then Arkansas Rocks picked it up. So the more Beaker Street gets taken off the air, canceled, the more it keeps coming back. It's like a boomerang, and it's amazing that he still has a good audience, a loyal audience, and he's got a social media presence, and and they are quite active on Facebook during the program every Friday night.
And I know he had at least one major health scare. How's his health, Richard? Have you heard?
Yes, he developed multiple myeloma. Fortunately, with the medical school, and they have excellent medical facilities in Little Rock, he went through treatment through chemo. He is in remission, and he is, in last report, doing quite well. I have a friend from high school who had this multiple myeloma, and she's been in remission probably 10 years or more now. So hopefully he'll continue, God willing, to have great health. And he says he's going to keep doing Beaker Street as long as he can, and as long as he enjoys it, and as long as the people continue to want to hear it.
My God, that's great. I mean, this is great. And thanks so much for playing along and coming back on the show again. We'll probably circle back. Honest to God, I think this may be the second most popular show overall that I ever did on Beaker Street.
Oh, wow.
I continue to get comments every week or two anyway from people that are seeing it for the first time on YouTube. So it's a big part of people's lives. Richard, thanks for coming on this podcast.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much, George. It's a pleasure being with you. It really is.
Yeah, folks, Richard Robinson, Dr. Richard Robinson is a professor in the Department of Mass Media and Strategic Communication at the University of Tennessee @Martin. We'll talk again soon, pal.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, and folks, if you like Podcast by George, if you like this, and I'm not afraid to digress. Now, this is a lot different than my normal show, but still, we got into a little bit of the political side of this stuff. If you like music, if you like the world politics, the politics that are affecting us all, subscribe to Podcast by George. It's easily done, and you can do it on Facebook or YouTube if you're watching it right now. But you can also do it on podcastbygeorge.com. There you just choose an icon. YouTube and Facebook are both there for the live video streams. Just select one of those little badges and click on subscribe. Give us a thumbs up. Ring the notification bell on YouTube and all that kind of stuff. But also, if you think you might just like to hear these in audio, you can select iTunes or the iHeartRadio app or Deezer, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, places like that. Podcast by George can be found just about every place that audio podcasts are found. But that's going to do it, folks. That's going to wrap it up. That's all there is, and there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.